The envelope arrived on what would have been Dad's 70th birthday. I stood in the doorway of my cramped studio apartment, still in my nursing scrubs from the overnight shift, staring at the return address. Whitmore and Associates, estate attorneys. 6 months after my father's death, and they were still finding ways to remind me of my spectacular failure as a daughter. My hands shook as I tore it open, probably because I already knew what it would say. More debt. More consequences of the financial disaster my father had supposedly left behind. More reasons why my brother Marcus had been right to take control of everything after the funeral, protecting the family assets from Dad's mismanagement before creditors could seize them all. Dear Ms. Eleanor Hartford, we regret to inform you that additional creditors have come forward regarding your father's estate, as co-signer on the attached accounts. The paper slipped from my fingers, fluttering to the floor like a wounded bird. Co-signer. That word had become the defining feature of my life since Dad's stroke took him suddenly at 64. Co-signer on the business loans he'd supposedly mismanaged. Co-signer on the medical bills from his final hospitalization. Co-signer on debts I hadn't even known existed until Marcus explained how Dad had hidden his financial ruin from both of us. At 38, I had nothing. My nursing salary barely covered my rent after debt payments consumed nearly half my income. The childhood home where Marcus now lived, where our father's woodworking shop still held tools I wasn't allowed to touch. The investment accounts, the life insurance, the vintage truck Dad had restored together with me over 3 summers. All of it had gone to Marcus in that first will reading, the one where our family attorney, Mr. Whitmore, had explained with apologetic precision how Dad had made Marcus the sole heir specifically to protect assets from the catastrophic debt he'd left in my name. Your father wanted to ensure something survived for family, Mr. Whitmore had said, his eyes heavy with sympathy I didn't want. He knew the creditors would come after anything in your name. I'd accepted it. What choice did I have? Marcus was the successful one, the investment banker with the corner office and the 6-figure salary. Of course, Dad would trust him with financial matters. I was just the night shift nurse who'd never quite lived up to family expectations, who'd chosen helping strangers over building wealth. My phone buzzed. Marcus, naturally. The monthly reminder that he was covering the property taxes on Dad's house, that he was managing the estate's remaining complexities, that I should be grateful he was handling everything. Can we meet tomorrow? The shop. 10 a.m. Important estate matter. I stared at the message, dread settling in my stomach like a stone. Another important estate matter probably meant more debt, more signatures required, more consequences of the father I'd loved, but apparently never really knew. That night, as I administered medications to patients who depended on me, I thought about the wood shop where Dad had taught me to read grain, to respect the tools, to understand that the best work required patience and precision. Marcus had never been interested in woodworking. He'd been too busy building his career, making money, becoming successful. While I'd spent weekends in the shop with Dad, Marcus had been networking and climbing corporate ladders. Yet Dad had left him everything, and left me with debt that would take decades to escape. I couldn't know then that my father had made a choice far more complex than any of us understood, that the man I'd thought I knew had been playing a game of chess with higher stakes than I'd imagined, that tomorrow morning in his old workshop, surrounded by the tools he'd loved, I would begin to discover just how wrong we'd all been about David Hartford's final wishes. As I drove home in the gray dawn, the city still quiet around me, I could almost hear Dad's voice, the way it used to sound in the shop. Sometimes, Ellie, the most important work happens in places people forget to look. At the time, I thought he meant the craftsmanship hidden in drawer joints and cabinet backs. I'd had no idea he was teaching me something else entirely, but that understanding was still hours away. First, I had to survive one more night of crushing debt, one more morning of wondering how my brother had gotten everything while I'd gotten nothing but bills and disappointment. The truth, as I would discover, was far stranger and more deliberate than I could have imagined. And it would begin with a piece of furniture I'd walked past 1,000 times, without really seeing what it held. I arrived at Dad's house, Marcus's house now, I corrected myself, at exactly 10 a.m. The Craftsman bungalow looked the same as always, But everything felt different now that it belonged to my brother. Even the garden boxes Dad and I had built together seemed like artifacts of someone else's life. Marcus opened the door before I could knock. At 42, he still had that polished look of success. Designer polo shirt, expensive watch, hair that suggested regular salon visits, rather than the $15 haircuts I got at the strip mall near my apartment. We'd inherited Dad's height, both of us topping 6 feet. But where I'd gotten Dad's broad build and tendency toward exhaustion, Marcus had gotten Mom's elegant bone structure and seemingly endless energy. "Ellie, thanks for coming." His voice had that professional neutrality he used when discussing unpleasant business. "We need to talk about the shop." My stomach tightened. "What about it?" "I'm planning to convert it. Home office for the new consulting practice I'm starting." He gestured toward the backyard, where Dad's workshop stood separate from the house. "The equipment needs to go. I was hoping you'd want first choice of anything sentimental before I call the estate sale company." I felt something crack inside my chest. "You're selling Dad's tools?" "Ellie, be realistic. Neither of us are woodworkers. The equipment is just taking up space, and some of those machines are worth serious money. The table saw alone could bring $3,000. Dad used that saw for 40 years. And now he's gone." Marcus's tone softened slightly. "Look, I know this is hard, but we have to be practical. You've got your own financial challenges, and I'm trying to position myself for the next phase of my career. Keeping a workshop full of expensive equipment we'll never use doesn't honor Dad's memory. It just ties up assets." Assets. Dad's tools reduced to balance sheet items. I wanted to scream, to tell Marcus that some things mattered more than their resale value. But he'd never understood that. He'd never spent Saturday mornings in the shop. Never learned the satisfaction of transforming raw wood into something beautiful and functional. When, I managed to ask. "Estate sale is scheduled for next weekend, so if you want to walk through, now's the time." He checked his watch. "I've got a call in 20 minutes, but take your time. Lock the shop when you're done. Keys on the bench." And just like that, he was gone, disappearing back into the house to manage whatever deal was more important than his sister's grief. I walked across the lawn toward the workshop, each step feeling heavier than the last. The shop smelled the same, sawdust and oil and the faint sweetness of cedar, scents that instantly transported me to childhood. Dad's presence was so strong here, I almost expected to hear his voice calling me over to check the grain on a piece of maple. The table saw Marcus wanted to sell dominated the center of the space. I ran my fingers over its cast iron surface, remembering Dad's patient instruction: respect the tool, Ellie. It doesn't care about your intentions, only your actions. Every piece of equipment had a story. The band saw where I'd learned to cut curves. The router table where Dad had taught me about negative space and design. The workbench scarred and stained from decades of use, where we'd assembled countless projects together. And there, against the back wall, stood the piece that had been Dad's pride. A massive tool chest he'd built himself, modeled after the classic machinist cabinets, but customized to his exact specifications. 10 drawers of varying sizes, each perfectly fitted and balanced, figured walnut with ebony accents. The dovetails so precise they looked like they'd grown together naturally, rather than been cut by human hands. I'd helped him build it, my first real project beyond birdhouses and cutting boards. I'd been 16, and we'd spent 8 months on it together, working every Saturday and most Sunday afternoons. Dad had insisted on perfection, making me recut joints that were almost right until they were exactly right. "This is your inheritance, Ellie," he'd said one Sunday when we were fitting the drawers, not just the chest, but the understanding that good work requires commitment. That shortcuts always show, that the hidden joints matter as much as the visible ones. The memory brought tears I'd been fighting all morning. My inheritance. He'd said that. And then he'd left everything to Marcus. I approached the chest slowly, running my hands over its smooth surface. The drawers still glided with that perfect resistance Dad had achieved through meticulous adjustment. I opened the top drawer, hand tools, organized with typical precision. The second drawer held measuring instruments. The third, chisels arranged by size. The fourth drawer stuck. I pulled again, more firmly. Nothing. That wasn't right. Dad had spent weeks perfecting the drawer mechanisms. I bent down, examining the front. No visible damage, no obvious obstruction. There was a small gap along the bottom edge of the drawer, narrower than it should be, as if something was blocking it from behind. My pulse quickened. I opened the drawer above it, shining my phone's flashlight down into the space. There, wedged behind the stuck drawer, I could see the edge of what looked like a document box. Dad had built a hidden compartment. For a moment, I just stared, my mind trying to process what I was seeing. Then, with shaking hands, I began removing tools from the upper drawers, working my way down, pulling each drawer completely out of its slots. The chest's internal structure revealed itself, and there, exactly where I'd suspected, was a sealed metal document box, held in place by a sliding panel I'd helped install but had assumed was just structural support. I worked the panel free, and the box came with it. Heavy, something substantial inside. On top, an envelope with my name in Dad's handwriting. Eleanor Rose Hartford. Read this first. I sank onto Dad's old shop stool, the envelope trembling in my hands. Through the workshop window, I could see Marcus's house, could imagine him on his important call, completely unaware that I'd just found something he'd never bothered to look for. Sometimes, Ellie, the most important work happens in places people forget to look. I opened the envelope and began to read. My dearest Ellie, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And you've found what I hid in the chest we built together. I knew you'd remember. I knew you'd understand that drawers that don't open mean there's something worth protecting. By now, you've met with Whitmore and heard the reading of my will. The one where Marcus got everything and you got debt. You've probably spent months wondering why I betrayed you after all those years we worked side by side in the shop. Wondering if I ever really saw your value. Wondering if your brother was always the golden child and you were just the consolation prize. I need you to know something, and I need you to believe it. I saw you. I always saw you. Every Saturday morning you showed up in the shop. Every patient, project you completed, every time you chose helping people over chasing money. I saw all of it, and I was proud. What you haven't seen yet is what Marcus became. 3 years ago, he approached me with an investment opportunity. His firm was launching a hedge fund, and as a favor to family, he'd let me in on the ground floor. Guaranteed returns, minimal risk. All I had to do was liquidate some assets and trust him with the capital. I said no. I don't gamble with money I might need for retirement, and I certainly don't gamble with my children's inheritance. Marcus didn't take it well. He started coming around more often, always with new urgency. The opportunity was closing. Other investors were securing positions. I was making a mistake that would cost the family millions. When I still refused, his visits changed tone. He started pointing out my age, suggesting I didn't understand modern finance, implying that my woodworking income was quaint and insufficient. Then he started asking about my will. Had I updated it? Had I considered that you, as a nurse, would never achieve significant wealth? That leaving assets to you was essentially throwing money away? That I should recognize his superior financial acumen and trust him with managing family wealth? I realized then that I didn't know my son anymore. Maybe I never had. The boy I'd raised had become someone who measured human worth in earning potential, someone who saw his sister as a financial liability rather than a person with value beyond her bank account. I also realized he'd never stop trying to get control of my assets. And if something happened to me, he'd use every tool at his disposal to make sure he was the one who inherited. So I made a plan. I created the will Whitmore read at that first meeting. The one that gave Marcus everything and left you with debt. But Ellie, that debt isn't real. Every single account listed with your name as cosigner is fabricated. I created shell LLCs, manufactured loan documents, built an entire architecture of fictional obligation. Why? Because I needed Marcus to believe he'd won. I needed him to take possession of this house, to claim the investment accounts, to assume control of everything visible. I needed him to stop looking. Because the real inheritance, the one I built for you, is hidden, just like the compartment in this chest. In the document box, you'll find the following. 1. A second will, properly executed and notarized, dated 6 weeks after the one Whitmore read. This one supersedes the first and leaves everything to you. 2. Documentation proving the debt attributed to you is fabricated, along with instructions for dissolving the shell companies. 3. Titles and deeds for properties. Marcus doesn't know I owned. 4. Information about accounts he's never seen. 5. Evidence of his attempts to manipulate me, including recorded conversations where he dismisses your worth and argues for his exclusive inheritance rights. The total value is substantial, more than I think even Marcus realizes I'd accumulated. Enough that you'll never worry about debt again. Enough that you can continue being the kind of person who chose nursing because it mattered, not because it paid well. But Ellie, this inheritance comes with a responsibility. Marcus needs to face consequences for what he's become. Not out of cruelty, but because real love sometimes requires difficult truths. The evidence I've provided will reveal that he's been living in a house he doesn't actually own, managing accounts that aren't his, building his new business on a foundation that's about to dissolve. You have a choice. You can take this to Whitmore immediately, expose everything, and reclaim what's yours. Or you can wait, observe, and give Marcus enough rope to reveal his true character completely. I recommend patience. Let him proceed with the estate sale. Let him sell my tools. Let him show you who he really is when he thinks he's won. Then take this to Whitmore, and let my real will speak for itself. I'm sorry you had to carry this burden even for a few months, but I needed you to understand what you were dealing with. Marcus isn't cruel, but he's been corrupted by a world that taught him money matters more than people. He needs this revelation. He needs to lose everything he thought he'd won to understand what he's actually lost along the way. You, my dear daughter, are my real inheritance. Not the money I'm leaving you, but the person you chose to become. Someone who measures success in lives helped rather than dollars earned. Someone who shows up for the difficult work because it needs doing. Someone who remembers that the hidden joints matter as much as the visible ones. The chest we built together, keep it. Let it remind you that good work takes time, that shortcuts always show, and that sometimes the most valuable things are hidden in places people forget to look. I love you, I'm proud of you, and I trust you to handle this with the same careful precision you brought to every project we worked on together. With all my heart, Dad. P.S. The combination to the document box is 160832. The dates you completed your first dovetail joint, got your nursing license, and we finished this chest. I knew you'd remember. I don't know how long I sat in the shop, Dad's letter clutched in my hands, tears streaming down my face. The emotions were too complex to name. Grief, vindication, anger, relief, all tangled together like a pile of sawdust and wood shavings. He'd seen me. He'd always seen me. And he'd seen Marcus too. Seen what my brother had become and made a plan to address it. The document box opened easily once I entered the combination, each number a memory that made me cry harder. Inside, everything Dad had promised, legal documents in plastic sleeves, organized with the same meticulous attention to detail he'd brought to woodworking. I pulled out the first folder. Last Will and Testament of David James, Hartford, dated 3 months after the will Whitmore had read. I, David James Hartford, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all previous wills and testamentary documents. I leave my entire estate, including but not limited to real property, financial accounts, personal possessions, and business assets, to my daughter Eleanor Rose Hartford, to my son Marcus William Hartford. I leave only this, the understanding that inheritance is earned through character, not entitlement. Should he contest this will, I have provided evidence of his attempts to manipulate me into changing my testamentary plans for his exclusive benefit. It went on for pages, meticulously detailed, witnessed, and notarized, unbreakable. The next folder contained the debt documentation, or rather, the proof that there was no real debt. Shell company formation papers, all with my father's signature as sole owner, loan documents between him and himself, a spreadsheet showing exactly how he'd constructed the fiction of my financial ruin, and at the bottom, a letter from the law firm handling what I thought were real creditor claims. They were actually Dad's attorneys, maintaining the fiction per his instructions until I found the real will. The properties file shocked me most. Dad hadn't just owned our family house. He'd owned the building his woodworking shop occupied downtown, which he'd been renting to himself. 2 rental properties in the University District. A small commercial space near the hospital where I worked. Properties Marcus had no idea existed because they were held in an LLC that had never appeared on any document related to the estate. The financial accounts were substantial. Not millionaire-level wealth, but enough that I'd never have to work night shifts unless I chose to. Enough that I could go back to school if I wanted. Enough that financial stress would never define my life again. And the final folder, the one that made my stomach clench, recordings. Dad had recorded his conversations with Marcus over the past 2 years. I scrolled through the file names, each one dated and labeled. March 15, Marcus demands investment access. MP3 June 22, Marcus questions will provisions. MP3 September 3, fired Marcus disparages Eleanor career. MP3 I plugged my earbuds in and selected the last one, steeling myself. Dad's voice, patient but tired. Marcus, your sister is a good person doing meaningful work. Marcus's response, casual and dismissive. Dad, be realistic. She's 38 and renting a studio apartment. She has no savings, no investment portfolio, no real assets. Nursing is noble, sure, but it's not a path to actual success. When you're gone, am I supposed to support her? Because that's what leaving her a significant portion of the estate would mean. She'd burn through it in a decade through bad decisions and lack of financial sophistication. She's your sister. And I love her, but love doesn't mean pretending she's something she's not. You're a smart man. Dad, you built real wealth through careful planning. Don't let sentimentality destroy that legacy. Leave the assets to someone who understands how to manage them. I'll make sure Ellie is taken care of in ways that suit her capacity. I yanked the earbuds out, physically sick. Her capacity, as if I were a child who couldn't be trusted with adult responsibilities. My phone buzzed. Marcus again. Did you finish in the shop? Estate sale company needs full inventory by tomorrow. I stared at the message, then at the document box full of truth. Dad's letter had advised patience. Let him proceed with the estate sale. Let him sell my tools. Let him show you who he really is. But I'd just heard exactly who he was. I'd heard him dismiss my entire life as insufficient. Heard him reduce me to a problem to be managed rather than a person to be valued. Still, I thought about what Dad had said. Real love sometimes requires difficult truths. Marcus didn't just need to lose his inheritance. He needed to understand what he'd lost by becoming the kind of person who measured his sister's worth in financial terms. I put all the documents carefully back in the box, sealed it, and sent Marcus a reply. Finished. Lots of memories. Go ahead with the sale. Then I called Mr. Whitmore's office and made an appointment for the following week. After the estate sale. After Marcus had sold Dad's tools and started planning his new office. After he was fully committed to a future that was about to dissolve around him. As I drove away from the house that was legally mine but that Marcus thought he owned, I felt something I hadn't felt in 6 months. Not quite happiness, the grief was too fresh for that. But something like purpose. Dad had left me more than money. He'd left me a final lesson in patience, precision, and the importance of getting the timing exactly right. Sometimes, as he'd taught me in the shop, the most critical phase of any project is knowing when to make your final cut. My moment was coming. I just needed to wait for exactly the right time. The week passed with a surreal quality, as if I were walking through someone else's life. I went to work, administered medications, comforted frightened patients, and said nothing to anyone about what I'd discovered. At night, alone in my studio apartment, I would take out Dad's letter and reread it, finding new meaning each time. Marcus texted updates about the estate sale preparations. The auctioneer was impressed with the tool collection. Several serious buyers had already expressed interest in the table saw. Did I want to claim anything for sentimental value before they listed everything? No, I texted back. You're right about being practical. His response came immediately. Good to see you're being mature about this, Ellie. Dad would appreciate you accepting reality. I deleted the message without responding, my jaw tight with anger I couldn't yet express. On Saturday, I drove past the house, my house, and saw cars lining the street, the estate sale in full swing, people carrying out Dad's tools, his projects, pieces of his life reduced to transactions. I recognized some of the buyers, woodworkers from the community who'd known Dad, who probably thought they were helping his family by purchasing his equipment. If they only knew, I parked down the block and watched Marcus in the driveway, directing traffic, accepting payments, every inch the efficient executor managing his father's estate, playing the role perfectly. My phone rang. Mr. Whitmore. Eleanor, I wanted to confirm our appointment Monday morning. You mentioned finding some documentation that requires immediate review? Yes, documentation that changes everything about my father's estate. A pause on the other end. I see. And you're certain you want to wait until Monday? If there's urgency, Monday is perfect. I watched another buyer carry out a set of hand planes Dad had collected over 30 years. I want to make sure all the estate sale transactions are complete and recorded. Very well. 9 a.m. in my office. Should I anticipate any particular complexity? I thought about the document box locked in my apartment safe, about the second will that would overturn everything, about Marcus's face when he discovered the truth. Yes, Mr. Whitmore, significant complexity. After we hung up, I sat in my car until the last buyer left, until Marcus locked up the empty shop and went back into the house. My house. The house he'd been living in for 6 months, making plans for, treating as his own. On Monday, that would end. Monday morning, I arrived at Whitmore & Associates 30 minutes early, the document box heavy in my arms. The receptionist recognized me from the original will reading, her expression shifting from professional pleasantness to something like sympathy. Ms. Hartford, Mr. Whitmore is expecting you. She led me to the same conference room where I'd learned that I'd inherited nothing but debt, where Marcus had sat across from me with his careful expression of concern that I now recognized as performance, where my father's apparent betrayal had been spelled out in legal language that seemed unbreakable. Mr. Whitmore entered moments later, a man in his 60s with silver hair and the careful manner of someone who'd spent decades managing family crises. He'd been Dad's attorney for 20 years. Eleanor, I have to admit, your phone call intrigued me. He sat down across from me, notepad ready. What documentation have you found? I slid the metal box across the table. Everything my father wanted me to find, after I'd had time to understand what I was dealing with. His eyebrows rose. I'm not sure I follow. My father created a fiction. The debt, the financial ruin, the will that left everything to Marcus. All of it was theater, designed to make Marcus believe he'd won while I figured out what Dad had really planned. I opened the box and removed the second will, placing it in front of Whitmore. His face went pale as he read the date. This is dated 6 weeks after the will I probated. His voice had changed, sharpening into professional assessment. And properly executed. Eleanor, where did you find this? Hidden in a tool chest Dad and I built together, along with proof that the debt attributed to me is fabricated, documentation of properties Marcus doesn't know exist, and recordings of conversations where my brother argued that I shouldn't inherit anything because I'm not financially sophisticated enough to manage wealth. Whitmore sat back, his professional composure cracking slightly. Your father told you where to find this? In his own way, he taught me to look for the work that happens in places people forget to check. I pulled out the folders systematically. The debt documentation, the property deeds, the financial accounts, the evidence of Marcus's manipulation attempts. For the next hour, Whitmore examined every document with meticulous attention to detail. His expressions shifted from shock to professional concern to something that might have been admiration. This is extraordinary, he said finally. Your father essentially created a parallel estate structure, completely legal, completely documented, invisible to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for it. He looked up at me. Did you know? When we read the first will, did you have any indication? None. I believed every word. I spent 6 months thinking my father had considered me a failure. The grief was still there, even knowing the truth. 6 months carrying debt I thought was real, watching my brother live in what I believed was his house, thinking I'd disappointed the person who mattered most. I'm sorry, Whitmore's sympathy seemed genuine. David was my client and my friend, but this was Cruel, even with good intentions. It was necessary. I thought about the recordings, about Marcus's casual dismissal of my worth. My brother needed to reveal himself completely, and I needed to understand what I was actually dealing with. What do you want to do? The question I'd been asking myself all week. Dad had left the choice to me. Expose everything immediately, or wait and observe. I'd waited. I'd observed. I'd watched Marcus sell Dad's tools and plan his new office and text me updates with barely concealed condescension. I'd seen enough. I want to file this will for probate. I want the debt documentation submitted to dissolve those fictitious obligations. I want Marcus served with notice that he's been living in my house, managing my accounts, and selling my property. I met Whitmore's eyes, and I want him to understand exactly why this happened. Whitmore nodded slowly. This will be complicated. Marcus will contest, argue that your father wasn't competent, claim undue influence. He has evidence of Marcus attempting to manipulate Dad, recordings dated and documented. If my brother wants to argue competency, we can present proof of who was actually trying to exert undue influence. Fair point, Whitmore made notes. I'll need a few days to prepare the filings. In the meantime, I'd advise you not to contact Marcus. Let this go through proper legal channels. Agreed. Though I'd like to be present when he's served. That's unusual, but I can arrange it. Whitmore studied me. Eleanor, I knew your father for 2 decades. This plan, it's brilliant and thorough and utterly unlike anything I've ever encountered in estate law. But I have to ask, do you really think this will fix whatever's broken between you and your brother? I thought about Marcus's voice on those recordings, the casual cruelty of reducing my life's work to insufficient, the ease with which he dismissed my value as a human being because my bank account was smaller than his. No, I said honestly, but it might force him to confront what he's become. And if it doesn't, at least he'll know there are consequences for measuring people in dollars instead of dignity. They served Marcus 3 days later at his office, the investment firm where he'd been building his consulting practice. Whitmore had arranged for me to be present, though I stayed in the reception area rather than witnessing the actual serving of papers. I didn't need to see his face to know when it happened. The sound that carried from his office, something between a shout and a gasp, told me everything. Moments later, Marcus burst into the reception area, papers clutched in his hand, face flushed with something between rage and disbelief. Ellie, what the hell is this? I stood, keeping my voice level. The truth, Dad's real will, the one where I inherit everything. That's impossible. We read the will. Whitmore probated it. The house is mine. The accounts are all mine. Dad created a second will, properly executed, dated after the one you heard. He left everything to me, Marcus. The house you've been living in, the accounts you've been managing, even the tools you just sold. All of it belongs to me. His face cycled through expressions too quickly to catalog. Shock, denial, calculation, anger. This is some kind of fraud. Dad wouldn't. He knew I was the only one capable of managing the estate properly. Actually, he knew you'd say exactly that, which is why he left me recordings of every conversation where you argued that I was too financially incompetent to inherit anything. That stopped him. What recordings? The ones where you called my career meaningless, where you told Dad leaving me assets would be throwing money away, where you reduced your sister to a problem to be managed rather than a person with worth. I kept my voice steady, professional, though my heart was hammering. He recorded everything, Marcus. Every manipulation attempt, every dismissal, every argument you made for your exclusive inheritance rights. I was trying to protect family wealth. From me, from your own sister. The anger I'd been controlling for days finally broke through. You were so busy measuring my worth and earning potential that you forgot I was actually a person. Dad saw that. He saw what you'd become. Marcus's hand tightened on the papers. So what? He left everything to you out of spite, to punish me for being financially successful? He left everything to me because I chose a career helping people over chasing money, because I showed up to build furniture with him instead of networking for deals, because when he needed someone who understood that some things matter more than their resale value, I was the one who'd been there all along. This is insane. I'll contest it. Diminished capacity, undue influence. Please do, and will present evidence of who was actually trying to exert undue influence. Judges tend to find recorded attempts at manipulation pretty compelling. I picked up my bag. The house needs to be vacated within 30 days. The estate sale proceeds need to be returned or accounted for, and the investment accounts you've been managing need to be frozen immediately pending full estate reconciliation. You're taking everything? His voice cracked slightly. After I spent 6 months managing the estate, dealing with creditors, protecting family assets. The creditors were fake, Marcus. The debt Dad supposedly left me was fabricated. He created shell companies and loan documents specifically to make you think I was financially ruined, because he knew you'd never look further if you believed you'd already won. I watched that information land, watched my brother's expression shift from anger to confusion to something that might have been horror. But the house payments, the property taxes, I've been covering expenses on a property you never owned. My property, which I'll thank you to maintain properly until you vacate. His hand holding the papers was shaking now. Ellie, we're family. We can work this out. Mediation, arbitration, we don't need to. You made your position on family very clear, Marcus. I'm the sister who wasn't financially sophisticated enough to manage wealth. Remember? The one you'd have to support because I'd made bad decisions and lacked capacity. I turned toward the elevator. Now you get to discover what it feels like to be on the other side of dismissal. Ellie, wait. But I was already walking away, my father's voice in my head. Sometimes, Ellie, the most important work happens in places people forget to look. Good work requires patience. Shortcuts always show. The hidden joints matter as much as the visible ones. I'd been patient. I'd done the work properly. And now, finally, the hidden structure Dad had built was revealed. The legal process unfolded exactly as Whitmore had predicted. Marcus contested the will, filing motions arguing diminished capacity and undue influence. In response, we submitted the recordings, the dated documentation of his manipulation attempts, and sworn testimony from Dad's doctors confirming his mental competency up until his final stroke. The judge reviewing the case called it one of the most meticulously documented estate plans I've encountered in 30 years on the bench. Dad's second will was validated. Marcus's contest was denied. The estate's true structure was revealed. The house was legally mine. The investment accounts were transferred to my name. The properties Marcus had never known about were recorded with me as sole owner. The fake debt was dissolved, and the law firm that had been maintaining the fiction on Dad's instructions sent a formal letter clearing my name from any financial obligations. But numbers on legal documents weren't the complicated part. The complicated part was figuring out what to do about my brother. Marcus moved out of the house within the required 30 days, finding a condo downtown that probably cost more than he wanted to spend. He returned what remained of the estate sale proceeds, about 40% of the original value, the rest having already been spent or dispersed. He cooperated with the estate reconciliation, though his attorneys made the process as expensive and time-consuming as they legally could. We didn't speak directly for 3 months. Then, on what would have been Dad's 71st birthday, I found Marcus sitting on the front steps of the house when I came home from work. Not the house he'd lost, but my house, my inheritance. The place where Dad's workshop still stood in the backyard, mostly empty now except for the tool chest we'd built together. The doorbell doesn't work, he said when I approached. I was going to call, but I thought maybe you wouldn't answer. I might not have, I admitted, sitting down beside him but leaving space between us. What do you want, Marcus? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. He looked different than I remembered. Thinner, maybe, tired. The polish I'd always associated with him seemed dulled. I've been listening to them, he said finally. The recordings Dad made. Whitmore provided copies as part of the discovery process, and I've been listening to them. And you were right. About what I became. He looked at me then, and I saw something in his expression I'd never seen before. Not the confidence or the calculation, but something closer to genuine pain. I listened to myself dismiss your entire career, reduce your value to earning potential, talk about you like you were a problem to be solved rather than my sister. Why? The question I'd been asking myself for months. When did I become less than human to you? I don't know exactly when it happened. He rubbed his face with both hands. Somewhere along the way, I bought into a worldview that measures success in money and power. My firm, my colleagues, the culture I was swimming in, it all reinforced the idea that people like me, people who manage wealth, are inherently more valuable than people like you, people who serve others. People like me kept you alive when you had appendicitis at 22, I said quietly. People like me held your hand during Dad's funeral. People like me matter, Marcus. I know that now, his voice cracked. Or I'm learning it. Therapy twice a week, trying to figure out how I turned into someone Dad felt he needed to trick into revealing his own ugliness. I hadn't expected that. You're in therapy? Mandated by my firm after the estate contest became public. Some of the recordings leaked, and turns out companies don't love having partners who openly express contempt for service professionals. He laughed, but it was bitter. I'm on probation at work. My consulting practice never launched. And I've spent 3 months trying to understand how I became the kind of person who could look at his sister and see only her salary. We sat in silence for a while. A car passed on the street. Someone was mowing a lawn several houses down. Normal sounds of a normal evening that felt anything but normal. I'm not going to apologize for what Dad did, I said finally. You needed to face consequences. You needed to lose everything you thought mattered to understand what you'd actually lost. I know, and I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me. Marcus pulled something from his pocket. A small wooden box, simple construction but carefully made. I made this in a community workshop downtown. It's been decades since I did any woodworking, and I'm terrible at it now. But I remembered Dad teaching us that the work matters, not just the result. I took the box, opening it carefully. Inside, on a bed of felt, was my mother's locket, the one I thought had been lost years ago. I found it in Dad's shop before I moved out. I almost sold it with everything else because I was so focused on maximizing estate value that I forgot it was Mom's, that it meant something beyond its resale price. He gestured to the box. The box is garbage carpentry. The joints are sloppy. The finish is uneven. But I made it because I wanted to return something that mattered in a container that represented effort, even if the effort was inadequate. I closed my fingers around the box, feeling tears prick my eyes. Thank you. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not even sure I deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I'm trying to understand what Dad was teaching me, that people matter more than profit, that the hidden work counts. That inheritance should be earned through character, not entitlement. He stood preparing to leave. I'm sorry, Ellie, for all of it, for dismissing you, for making you feel worthless, for becoming someone Dad felt he needed to protect you from. As he walked toward his car, I heard myself call out, Marcus. He turned back. Dad left you something in his real will. Did Whitmore tell you? A lecture about earned inheritance. I read it. No, something else. There's a clause that says if you can demonstrate meaningful personal growth and genuine understanding of why his plan was necessary, you're eligible to receive the woodworking shop tools. Not to sell, to use. I stood facing him across the lawn. I don't know if you'll ever meet that standard, but the possibility exists. He stared at me, something complicated moving across his face. Why would you honor that clause? After everything? Because Dad believed in the possibility of transformation. He believed people could learn from their mistakes and become better versions of themselves. I thought about all the Saturday mornings in the shop, all the patient lessons, all the time Dad had invested in teaching me. And because I'm not sure I want to be the kind of person who slams the door on possibility, even when it would be justified. Marcus nodded slowly, not quite smiling, but not quite not smiling either. I'll try to be worthy of that possibility. After he left, I went into the house, my house, and walked through rooms that felt simultaneously familiar and strange. This was my inheritance, but it was also my responsibility. The properties Dad had acquired, the investments he'd managed, the wealth he'd built, all of it was now mine to steward. But more than that, I'd inherited his final lesson. That real wealth isn't measured in dollars, that the hidden work matters as much as the visible success, that sometimes the most valuable inheritance is understanding what truly deserves protection and preservation. I walked out to the workshop, unlocking the door and stepping into the space that still smelled like sawdust and oil. The tool chest stood against the back wall, its secret compartment now empty but still perfectly constructed. The drawer that had stuck, that had led me to Dad's hidden truth, now glided smoothly once again. On the workbench, I found one more envelope with my name on it. How many letters had Dad left? How much planning had gone into this elaborate lesson? Eleanor, this last letter is for after. After you found the truth, filed the will, confronted Marcus. After the dust has settled and you're standing in the shop, wondering what comes next. Here's what comes next. You live, not in reaction to what Marcus said or did, not in response to his dismissal, not defined by his mistakes or your vindication. You live according to the values we built together in this shop. Patience, precision, quality work done for its own sake. Hidden joints that matter even when no one sees them. The money I've left you isn't meant to make you rich. It's meant to make you free. Free to choose the work that matters to you. Free to help people without worry. Free to build whatever life reflects who you actually are, rather than who the world says you should be. As for Marcus, that's your decision. Forgiveness, reconciliation, rebuilding, or boundaries and distance. Whatever you choose it deliberately. Don't let anger decide your future any more than you'd let his dismissal define your worth. I'm proud of you, Ellie. Not because you were the good daughter who got the inheritance, but because you showed up to build furniture with your old man when you could have been doing more important things. Because you chose a career helping people even though it paid less. Because when given the choice between easy money and meaningful work, you always chose meaning. That's real success. That's real wealth. And that's why everything I built ultimately belongs to you. Use it well, live well, and remember, the most important work happens in places people forget to look, including the hidden corners of your own heart, where you decide what kind of person you're going to be. All my love, always Dad. I folded the letter carefully, adding it to the growing collection of his words I'd been saving. Then I stood in the shop he'd loved, in the house he'd built our family in, and let myself finally, fully grieve, not just for his death, but for the months of confusion, for the brother I'd lost and might never fully regain, for the father who'd loved me enough to create an elaborate puzzle specifically designed to teach both his children what mattered most. 18 months after finding Dad's hidden will, I stood in the downtown woodworking shop I'd purchased, using a small portion of my inheritance. Not to run as a business, but as a community resource. A place where people could learn the satisfaction of making something with their hands. Where teenagers could discover that patient work has its own rewards. Where adults could rediscover the pleasure of creation over consumption. I still worked as a nurse. 3 shifts a week now instead of 5. With time left over for teaching woodworking classes 2 evenings and Saturday mornings. I'd never been happier. Marcus showed up sometimes, awkward and uncertain, but increasingly present. He'd completed his mandated therapy and then continued voluntarily. He'd left the investment firm and now worked with a nonprofit providing financial literacy education in underserved communities. The transformation wasn't complete. Old patterns emerged sometimes, old assumptions about value and worth. But he was trying. Last week, he'd come to my Saturday morning beginners class, 20 people learning to cut dovetails, including my 42-year-old brother who cut joints like a beginner and accepted correction with humility I'd never seen before. Like this, he'd asked, holding up his practice piece. Not quite. The angle needs to be steeper. Here. I adjusted his chisel placement. Feel how the grain wants to guide you. Work with it, not against it. He tried again, and this time the joint came together cleanly. Not perfect, but honest. Good work done with attention and patience. Thanks, he said quietly. Then, even more quietly, I miss him. Dad, I miss him, and I hate that I wasted so many years seeing him as just a woodworker instead of understanding what he was actually teaching us. He knew, I said. He knew, and he gave you another chance to learn the lesson. On the wall of the shop, I'd hung a photo of Dad in his workshop, surrounded by tools and projects, and the evidence of a life spent making things that mattered. Beside it, a quote I'd had engraved in walnut. The most important work happens in places people forget to look. The hidden joints matter as much as the visible ones. Good work requires patience. Shortcuts always show. David James Hartford students would ask me sometimes about the quote, about the man in the photo. I'd tell them about my father, the woodworker who taught me that inheritance isn't just what you leave behind, but the lessons you embed in how you leave it. That the real test of character isn't how you handle success, but how you handle having everything you thought mattered taken away. That transformation is possible, but it requires the patience to tear down what's been poorly constructed and rebuild it properly from the foundation up. That sometimes love means creating elaborate puzzles specifically designed to reveal uncomfortable truths. And that in the end, the inheritance that matters most isn't money or property or possession. It's understanding what deserves to be protected, preserved, and passed on to the next generation. I learned all of that from a hidden will, a stuck drawer, and a father who loved me enough to make me look for the work that happens in places people forget to check, including the hidden corners of family, finance, and our own hearts, where we decide what kind of people we're going to be. The shop is open every Saturday morning. Marcus comes most weeks now. We work side by side, building things together, relearning the patient craft of being siblings who value each other beyond our bank accounts. It's not the inheritance I expected, but it's the one I needed. And just like Dad taught me, the hidden joints are holding perfectly. This story explores themes of inheritance, family betrayal, and redemption. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Share your own stories of family complexity in the comments. Remember, real inheritance isn't about money. It's about the values and wisdom passed from one generation to the next. Until next time.